So we have some representatives now from the patient advisory group. So I'm going to ask you guys to come down and take your spot on the panel. So some of you are family members, some of you represent advocacy organizations. Yes, please, yes. And I'll let them introduce themselves to you. I need to admit something. So remember I told you in the morning we're looking to expand the parent advisory. One problem we have, and I see some of you, and I know everybody's burdened, but one problem we have is we clearly have overrepresentation of autism families on the advisory panel. So we're asking some of you who may want to represent another condition to kind of contact us if you would like that. It's not just autism. Our usual panel has multiple genetic syndromes and ADHD and autism. But today, actually, by virtue of who volunteers for this, everybody is autism. The themes, though, that we talk about will not be autism specific, because what we would like to talk about is the value of having a patient advisory board and the potential roles that parents and families and self-advocates and youth can take in research. So first, I'm going to just pass it on to you guys to introduce yourselves.
My name is Claudine Evangelista, and this is my husband, Anthony. And our son was Joshua, who spoke before. And we just actually joined the Ponds this past summer, so we're actually very new to the group.
Welcome.
Okay.
My
name's Connie Putterman, and I have been a long-time Pond parent advisor, I think since the beginning. I think that was in 2013 or 14. I have a son who was diagnosed with autism who's now 20. So, been around.
My name's Shannon Pasco. My son was Lucas with Valley, his service dog, who was with Joshua. And I also just recently joined Pond, just kind of on a whim, to be honest. I saw an email and I thought it sounded interesting, and so here I am.
I'm Mark Spoelstra. I'm the Executive Director of Autism Ontario, and I've been with Pond since, like Connie, from the very beginning, and delighted to be here.
Lovely. So we want to talk about a couple of things. So the first thing is I want to make a distinction between being a research participant and a research advisor on something like our PAC, our Patient Advisory Board. So a research participant is somebody who comes in and we collect data from you. And we are grateful that you do this, and that makes everything possible. But the PAC, the Patient Advisory Board, or the Participant Advisory Board, is not about that. So the Participant Advisory Board is about collaborating on the research and on the communication of the research results, and this thinking through the impact, things we've been talking about today, thinking about connections to policy, thinking about what may be very important to parents to consider within the limitations of our funding, and what maybe parents don't care about, and they may actually have some strong opinions about us wasting money in certain areas, for example, that are not prioritized by families. So this is about creating a collaborative relationship that goes beyond the families being participants to the families being our collaborators. And families and advocacy organizations and youth and self-advocates. I'm just going to say families to just keep it inclusive for now. So traditionally, honestly, when we started this some time ago, we had a much more simplistic view where the role of the PAC was the grant had been already funded, the science had already been decided, and the role of the PAC was to help us monitor progress and think through the implications and the communication with the rest of the community. And as we're growing, we are rethinking the scope of PAC because there are many other ways you guys can participate, anything from the design of new studies as we're making decisions to what to do next and what's important next, to the real important knowledge translation of impacting policy where we live, or having impact in terms of guidelines development to impact policy in other places around the world. So we are figuring it out. We basically, the approach we have taken is the goals of the pack should be driven by the pack. So the pack should be deciding what they want to be doing and what they find valuable and meaningful. And so that changes because membership in the pack changes, as you can imagine. And that's why I do feel kind of important that we need a bit more robust representation from other conditions also in our kind of usual meetings. But we thought that maybe what we can do today is I'll start with 2 questions that everybody will take a stab at answering, and then we'll open it up for you guys to ask questions to the pack about whatever actually you think is important as you think through what this may be. So the first question is a question about what you think is meaningful, what's important about a relationship that engages families and participants as collaborators rather than participants. And what you can use POND as an example, but if you have other experiences from other grants, you can talk about things like POND. It doesn't have to be only about POND, because this is not a situation where we want people to say how great POND is. This is about thinking through what's meaningful engagement with our families and our stakeholders. So you are welcome to get started.
Okay. For us, joining ponds, it's important because we get to hear what the science is providing with us, as well as hearing what other parents are going through or experiencing. And so being part of this organization, we actually learn more, and plus then we also get to give our own feedback and our suggestions. One of the areas that I'm looking for is the education system, where I've already talked to the POND committee about having the education system more involved in hearing what POND is doing, and maybe taking some of the research and trying to apply it in the classroom with our kids. Being a teacher, I know how difficult it is working with children with types of mental disorders, I should say, and it can be frustrating, as well as the parent of a child on the spectrum. It's very hard to see them struggle. So sometimes when I've been at these meetings and the other family days, I wish that the boards could be part of this and hear what's happening, and maybe take some and maybe try to work together. So that's where I'm hoping that maybe we can influence the school system.
I just want to add that we've been part of a number of different studies for over 10 years with Joshua. And a lot of the science really does go over our heads, but we feel every year we learn a little bit more, and we get to connect with special people like the doctors and therapists and other family members. And every little bit has helped us help Joshua. And we're hoping that our engagement in the program allows us to allows him to be more accepting of what he has and understand and learn and develop. He's had some misconceptions about his abilities, and unfortunately he's gone down the wrong path in terms of thinking about his abilities. And we've always wanted him to feel that he, like all of our children, have unlimited abilities, and there's just a different path that they need to take sometimes. So being part of this community has allowed us to learn more and have him get engaged and meet wonderful people like on the council and the doctors.
Anthony, I'm glad you said that, because you know, I've thought a lot about my reasons for being here and for being here for the long haul. I think I probably said it to Evdokia, but you know, you'll never get rid of me, which may be a problem. But actually, because I think that, you know, for me, I started out in this journey, and I've talked about this in these environments before. It was really a way for me at the beginning to really understand what autism meant and what it is and what it what it looks like and how I can learn from experts. And I think through that taking in of information, which all of you are doing today. So in a way, I'm talking about all of us who are already converted in terms of wanting to access information and the science and the evidence that really teaches us to better understand ourselves and our kids. And I think for me, it's been about better understanding not only my child, but myself too. And I think that over those years in that journey, I've been able to not only learn from the science and give, but and that's a big part of it, to be able to give what I have or what I know or what my child has or knows, but also to be able to be heard and to be understood of having needs and understanding what those needs are, and to be able to have a voice at the table. So I think starting out, that was my motivation, to be able to talk about the issues and the needs in a general way. And I think it's really important that our panel, none of us believe that we speak for everybody in this room, because we really don't. We just have our own examples of things, but we've also have insights and observations from living with the condition that we live with every day, and those insights really can inform. So that's why for me, it's really important to be part of the research community. Now, the other thing that I've thought a lot about is the idea of choice, and that we all have limited time and limited energy and limited focus, and it's where you choose to put that focus. And on a panel like this, or being part of Ontario Brain Institute or other organizations, I'm really involved in knowledge translation for ChildBright, which is a national research institute for childhood disability, and I choose to put my time there because I think that I'm having impact, and we're all doing it for that reason, to be able to provide something of impact and insight to others.
I kind of agree with everything that's been said so far. Again, my son and I have participated in other research studies also, and I haven't really found any information from them. We kind of participate in the study, and then we go off and onto our life, and not much comes of it. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought it would be a way to, participate, but also find more information out and be more connected to what is happening within the research community, which is just an interest of mine. I live east of Toronto, and I find a lot of things happen very much in Toronto. And so I thought I have the time at the moment to be able to participate, and it might be nice to have a perspective that's brought from a different community and a different area. And we don't have a lot of services in our area, so it's just my small way of maybe trying to bring the knowledge that happens through Pond and bring it to my area as well.
Seem to be in the middle in the middle of a coughing fit. So I'll try to be there. That's a little bit better, but I've been just struggling with a cold. There's so many reasons why it's important for families to engage in this conversation, and I would say mostly it's to be informed and to use your voice to talk about evidence. This cough is really, sorry. And I also think it's important to talk with researchers about what they're doing and to ask them the questions about why it matters about what they're doing and how will that ultimately have an impact on you as families and your children. And that when so many of you who are the most eloquent and effective advocates for your children and for yourselves, that you're speaking with government leaders and provincial leaders about public policy and about what evidence is and what impact what we're learning has on your daily lives. And to be able to be associated with a group like this, which has such a high degree of excellence, I can't stress that enough. We have the most amazing brain capacity in Ontario through this group, second to none in the world, I would say, or very close to the top. And so I think just to be associated with one another is already a really important part of this contribution. And the other thing I would say is, in my own work for many years now, I rarely think about what we do without thinking about what Pond is doing as well. And that goal is really to be much more seamlessly associated with each other, so that we're sharing similar stories and information, but in our own way. And to me, ultimately about changing the way we think about people with differences and how we can be helpful and where we should be focusing our energies. And if families are there and participating in that dialogue, that's going to influence the researchers. The researchers are going to be more interested in what they're doing specifically as it relates to the impact it has on all of you. And I can't imagine not working in this way. And then I would also say that the area where it has had a really interesting impact is to really be talking about neurodevelopmental differences, and not just specific names of identified diagnoses. And when I think about public policy, and we talk about this often on our panel, that autism often gets top billing in terms of interest. The bottom line is the best public policy is going to be informed that affects all people with those learning differences. And when we make really positive changes and we look at what do we have in common as opposed to what divides us, then we can speak with a greater voice and a more confident voice about saying we need more mental health supports that pay attention to the needs of developmental differences, that take a look at how early intervention makes a huge impact on choices in one's life, how family stress is reduced so that they can be the best parents they can possibly be. When you know and have access to information that helps to make sense of a very confusing time. And as the mention, the reflection on school as well, how do we help educators understand the unique nature of kids as opposed to just trying to fit kids with special needs on some other plane? And that the nature of this research that we're seeing at all the different levels that Pond is engaged in is something that, you can be proud of participating in, and that has actually helped us to speak with government. The panel that I sat on recently, we talked every meeting about the evidence and references made to the work of groups like Pond and others as well. But this is where we need to be together.
Thank you. Hard to follow this up, but I'm going to ask you to think about where it's not working, where the barriers are, and your ideas about what may facilitate or improve the impact that your time commitment and your brain commitment has on the research that we do.
Okay. Well, maybe Evdokia, you could also clarify, like when you talk about barriers, you mean to actually being involved, or like being actually involved with Pond, or getting more involved with research?
No, so what I mean is if the consensus is that this relationship can be valuable, what would it take to optimize it? Where are the barriers? Where are the limitations? What are the difficulties that kind of limit its scope or limit its impact? And how we can go about thinking solutions?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I think it's I want to say, and I thought about it a lot and have discussions with people about this, and I think that it comes down to the relationship. I think that there's a key component about building relationships and trust amongst the scientific community and the family or parent or patient community. I think that there's a real need to understand the values that partnerships and relationships can bring, and that the research environment is not so removed or foreign or something untouchable to families and what families go through. And I think that, you know, in the example, and I don't know if I'm answering your question 100%, Evdokia, but I think one of the things about Evdokia, about you and Pond, is that you naturally engage families in this environment, and it's natural to you to seek out feedback, opportunities, to give people opportunities to express what they're interested in. You do that naturally. I don't think all environments and all research groups do that. I don't think that there's always a buy-in from the research community to engage with families, and so the barriers are in lack of really, really solid evidence that shows that engaging with families more than just as participants or subjects improves research, but it's coming. That evidence is now being studied in terms of movements of the science of family engagement and research to look at the benefits. So I think that there's still a barrier because of the lack of evidence and the lack of perhaps understanding of how parents or families can fit into a research environment or process, and they can. And so it's up to us who've maybe been around a little bit to start to advocate to you that there are opportunities and that there are people and researchers like Evdokia and Pond that are open to families being more engaged and to expressing their interest in engagement, and that those movements are happening in the neurodevelopmental research world. So it's having that belief that you can contribute, and knowing that there are researchers and research community that are really interested in your involvement. Does that help a little bit?
Yeah, yes, that's the
Okay.
conversation, yeah.
Okay.
I'm sure you have more thoughts on this one.
I do have more.
No, I mean.
But no, you guys say it. You guys.
I mean, obviously, Connie, what you said is openness from the researchers, but I mean, there's every day there are different barriers of having enough time and feeling that you're getting enough traction and it's tangible outputs. The Pond has a focus, and we, as parents, we're looking at all different aspects of our child's development, not only the brain research, but the social, the education, the development, and we just want to have something holistic that could address all of those needs, but that's obviously not the focus ever. There are different groups and different organizations which have their own niche. I think for us, it's trying to help bring our experience to Pond while trying to get something out of it. And one thing that with Shannon we discussed is, or with the PAC we've discussed, is a youth council, because a lot of what we're finding is, yes, we could help our children, but we want them to engage with other children, similarly minded children who would accept them, and there is, Joshua and Lucas had a list for people to sign up if anyone's interested, but that's what we're trying to get at the end of the day, is our children to have a more, not to say a more, but more engagement, more socialization, where they don't feel judged and there's inclusiveness there.
Thank you. I guess before I pass it on, I need to clarify that actually, because that's a very important point, that although we've talked about the youth council for years, we have not been moving on the idea of a youth council until we had some new membership in our PAC that prioritized the youth council, and now it's a priority for us. So thinking through also the types of issues, so to your comment, some of the barriers that I see as a researcher is that the scope is basically articulated, but what's within scope for this particular grant. So this is not the Ministry of Education. This is not an institution that has power to kind of go across all the issues. It has a specific a focus, which is what we have been funded to do. And so I sometimes struggle when the requests come for things that I can't justify totally as part of what we've been funded to do. And so I'm struggling with that, so I'm putting it on the table. But in return, there are other things that come through that may not have to do with a specific scope, but may have to do with the process, the definition of the stakeholder, the figuring out who needs to be on the table, who needs to have a voice, that typically don't have a scope, but restricted by the funding agency and the funding of the particular grant. So struggling through that tension, right? But what I love about the PAC is that we can sit around the table and think it through and say, I'm struggling with this and I'm struggling with this, and what is possible within the constraints that we are working on. But anyway, I'm gonna let you keep going, and then I'll chime in when it comes up again.
I'm just thinking about, like you were saying, about some of the barriers that are there, and I think there's been some efforts to remove those barriers. We have these family days are one of the ways to actually make the connection between research and the families who are involved in it its own little iterative loop, and I think that already is evidence of thinking about barriers, and so that's why it's so important to ask the question. I often think of a presentation that was done by a gentleman by the name of R.E.A. Gitterman at one of the events that Connie and I participated in, where he talked about how there is this idea that maybe somehow research will make people see the truth and then make a policy decision that's based directly on that. And I think sometimes the barrier is just not feeling comfortable with how long these things take. And so I think sometimes as participants, we wish that the line was straight from here's the evidence to here's why you should make this decision, and changing the way we are as a society and how we invest in our citizens. And that in his presentation, he talked about you can have the truth about what the evidence says, but the way decisions get made in public policy life have to do with everything from who has the message, what the media decides to focus on, how one spins and is able to articulate evidence in a way that's compelling, and a particular agenda for a current leadership. So, and all of these factors and can shift depending on what time of year it is and where we are in a budget cycle and all of those things, or what's popular in the news at the moment, and wish that it didn't actually drive that. So I think families often say, like I was saying earlier, what's in it for us to participate in this, and is this the best place to invest? But it takes time, and you as family members don't always have that time. You're saying, right now, this is what's going on with my kid. So I think there's a barrier that's almost inherent in it, that's not due to a lack of a will to make that better, but because of the nature of the work, that it does take time, it takes funding, it takes leadership that's willing to take risks. And those things need to be supported by voters. So all of those pieces are there, and they are potential barriers in and of themselves. But when we work together, we do see that there's influence, and I have seen it in this province. And sometimes bad decisions are made that have nothing to do with good evidence and research that we're doing here or in other places. But other times we do. We do have that opportunity. And so I think I wish I could say to people, be confident in your continued participation. Don't be afraid to ask the questions. Keep asking what's in it for us. How does this make us better as a society, not just as a small space in time? I think it's worth living with some of those uncomfortable barriers and to keep pushing against them.
I have an interesting question. I know I'm about to open a big can of worms. I am immediately sorry. But as I deal with the autism community, and I'm from Haldeman, Norfolk, and would deal with reach out that way, how does the PAC or the council, especially yourself from Autism Ontario, affect any decision making? Because all we're hearing about is there's going to be a council, there might be this, we have to rework the system, we don't know what's going on right now. How would the PAC itself help shape that?
That's a really good question.
Sorry.
Yeah, I guess what it would depend on is what kind of decision making are you talking about? Because, I mean, that's one of the challenges, and I think some of the barriers, as Evdokia's pointed out, and I was going to make a comment about it, is that Pond is operating within the constraints of the grants that were submitted and that have been already funded to do certain things. So how much room is there within that to push the boundaries from a parent or patient point of view? And I was going to suggest that, I'd like to see more families engaged in specific projects on Pond, and to have projects actually put calls out for families who are part of the Pond network to have parents join their projects to be able to participate in more active understanding of the specific projects, and to encourage more knowledge translation earlier on in the process of doing the research. So we're hearing about studies that are ongoing, and we're getting lots of great information, and we are hearing about them sort of throughout. They're by no means finished, but certainly there is data. But I'd like to see the patient-parent partner more engaged earlier on, and maybe having a seat at the table to express, to learn, and to then perhaps be able to talk more specifically about certain projects, and to be able to bring that knowledge to other families with those particular interests or conditions. So that's one challenge, is how to get more engaged with the projects themselves, and whether that's a limitation that Pond has.
I would actually say that's the easy part. So, you're welcome to join projects. There are very few. I can't think of an investigator who would not take a parent on the team. Mm-hmm. I think the harder part is what you do with it after. So right. you get on the team, and then how do we go from there to influencing the decision making in the province, right? Yeah. So. Right. And I'm struggling with that. And if I may put a couple of cents there, I didn't mean to make it too narrow. So the actual research, the goals of the grant are set, and there is some room for flexibility, but it was conceptualized as a particular set of questions, right? But what the PAC does, it does not have to be strictly linked to just the data generated by Pond, right? So there will be data generated by Pond that has clear policy implications, and we're having some of these discussions. But a lot of other things are happening around us, as you guys know, and I wonder whether I don't know who made the comment before, where PAC is a place convert some families into savvy science consumers who can speak to the evidence, whether it is generated from Pond or not, whether it creates this group that becomes evidence savvy and has an interest in influencing policy. Because again, as has been talked by many, this takes a lot of work and a lot of time. And this is not a demand of our community, but it's a question to our community whether there are people who are interested in that kind of role. And then Pond can invest in the education. I don't want to use the word education, but it's in the effort to create this kind of savvy community that then can advocate. I mean, I don't know how you guys think about that.
Yeah, I think I'm an example of that because I've been around long enough that for years, and I think that it has given me that opportunity to be much more science savvy, to be able to want to take that evidence and, as Marg said, and become part of a group that can help influence or use evidence-informed research into policy or practice or whatever. And you have to want to do it, but then I think that being part of the Pond community does do that. It is part of that, I think, if you stay around. It definitely does that. But I think there needs to be more of us.
Yes.
Like, that's the thing. Like,
We need more of a voice.
yeah, there's not enough of us.
Voices. Yeah. Okay, maybe one more question. Somebody's?
Looks like I've got the red light.
Okay.
I'm on the Research Family Engagement Committee at Home Blue Review. So a lot of the issues you're talking about are very similar, how to get families more involved. And we talk about a lot of the obstacle stuff. It's things like diversity of diagnosis, diversity ethnically, all those things. It just seems like we've got a bunch of organizations all pulling in the same way. As I said, in the case of HB, for instance, it's across CP, it's across brain injuries, all sorts of, it's a much wider area they're trying to recruit on people for. But they're looking at them to participate, to partner, and everything else. Because I think grants are now looking for it. I think funding agencies want to see that kind of involvement as well. Do you see any areas where there would be, let's say, almost like institutional representation on the committee to try and sort of cross-pollinate across some of these groups better? That, I mean, you're Margaret, for instance, you're here. Are you as Margaret the parent, or are you as Margaret Autism Ontario? Would you have somebody who might be representative of an institution like Home Blue Review, St. Kids Hospital, who would be there in addition to being a parent and representative of a child with the condition, but also representing their institution in terms of some of the efforts that are going on in those areas?
Yeah, so if I can just comment about that, I should clarify, I'm not a parent. So not a parent of, not even a parent. And so I am one of the most fortunate people to be able to work with parents who can't always be at meetings, where as an organization like Autism Ontario, we do get to represent stories about what's happening at Pond, and that cross-pollination does occur. We spoke about I had an opportunity to represent Pond's work at an international meeting for autism research, and to do that with delight, because there's a way to speak about this and cross-pollinate in all kinds of places, including in meetings with government leaders and referring to outcomes of days like today and some of the key work that's happening. But to also be speaking about this on a national level when we engage in the Canadian, for instance, Autism Spectrum Disorders Alliance meetings, to make reference to that work as well and to say how important groups like this are, among others, also doing excellent research. So part of our work as an organization is to cross-pollinate. So you're right on in saying how important that is, and to find ways where we can align purposes to move things in a particular direction.
I'll be very brief. I know you said that there was one more question.
Okay.
But I just wanted to know how often the PAC meets and how do you meet? For all these different areas.
Okay, I can take a stab at it, and then these guys are going to tell you exactly what it feels like. So the idea was we have played with different models. What we're doing now is we're trying to stick with quarterly, and we have done two versions of this. So Sometimes we meet in person in a restaurant, have a glass of wine and a good meal, and talk stuff over. And sometimes we meet at Holland Bloorview with Zoom connection, and we log in people from all over the place, wherever they are. So we're still trying to figure out the format, and the membership to the PAC actually predicts that a bit. So if the majority of people are from Toronto, we're likely to get around the table with a glass of wine. But if the majority of people are not from Toronto, we're much more likely to take advantage of technology, and we're very willing to do that and have access to it, to actually run meetings remotely. So we are open to people from anywhere. It's just who volunteers to actually be on the PAC that determines a little bit the format. Anything else?
I just wanted to say it's great to be part of the PON committee, just because you feel like you're part of a family. You feel like other people can relate to your worries or questions that you may have, and hearing about all the different research, it gives you like hope. And so it's nice to come together and just share ideas or our thoughts. And so that's become also, I thought, just thinking about a barrier, is also getting our kids. As one of the goals of having Lucas and Joshua here today was that sometimes kids doing, like, for example, the brain scan can be very nerve-wracking or they're afraid. And so maybe speaking to kids who have actually participated, they can maybe make those other children not be so worried and see that it was okay to do it. And so that's why we're hoping with a youth committee, they can share their feelings and what they go through.
Yeah, I was going to say too that we've had a few iterations of how the PON PAC committee has worked, but Evdokii is right. Like a lot of it has been in person, which is really great. But we've also tried phone meetings or other use of technology, and which is fine. And I think that we also get a chance as a committee to attend the PON Science Days, which are really important. Besides the Family Day, and we've always had an opportunity to speak at Family Day, but also the PON Science Days are when the whole PON science community comes together for a day and a half or 2 days. And we get to, an opportunity to see each other as a PAC committee, but also interact with the scientists. Also, we usually sit down with some of the executive over lunch and give our feedback. So we've had a number of different ways that we've connected over the years, and I think it's for sure not a huge time commitment burden. I think the harder part is everybody is scattered, and it's trying to come up with some maybe very unified strategies of how we as a group might want to move forward. But one of the things that happened this year is Windermere came on and has really been working with the whole KT part of the PAC committee and looking at various activities that we as PAC committee members can do specifically and report back to the PAC. So I think this is an opportunity for people to do things that they might like to do, like read research lay summaries and give our feedback, or participate in the planning of today, or to do other things that there are opportunities to help with knowledge translation, maybe speak in a video or such. So there's ways that now we're trying to keep ourselves doing things in between that will contribute to knowledge translation.
Thank you. So I think because we're so late in time, very quick.
Yeah, it's very quick.
Because it's Becky.
Is there any email contact that we can
Yes.
address
So
to
we
understand better how it works and how can we collaborate?
Yes. Why don't we do that? So Genevieve will circulate to all of you I was planning to introduce Windermere in a second, who's our new knowledge translation officer. And so we can circulate your contact, and then we can take it from there. You can email with interest, with questions, and then we can take it from there. But what I really was trying to do is to give you a flavor of what this looks like and what this could be. So you guys can think about whether you may want to participate and how you may want to contribute. And we can follow up after over email or phone or whatever to kind of figure out the logistics. Because honestly, it's a living thing. So it has the flavor of the people who are members every time. So thank you to our PAC. I have to say, it is one of my greatest privileges working with this group of people. It's an extremely meaningful thing for me, but the idea is to also make it a meaningful thing for them and for you to make sure that it has maximum impact.